So this is our new playlist, and our interviewee today is Dr. Andrew Brown from Belfast, and I asked him to tell us about himself and his science.
My research area is obviously in attosecond science. So my work sits at the intersection of sort of high performance computing, attosecond science, and traditional atomic physics. And partly because of that, I've been lucky to get this research software engineering fellowship from UK Research and Innovation. And the goal there is instead of just viewing software as this tool that we use to do science, it's kind of seeing it as a worthy kind of expenditure of effort in its own right. And we all know this, those of us who develop any kind of code, even if it's just a simple Python script for doing analysis, you'll write it and it won't be well documented and it'll be a bit janky and then you forget about it. But my hope is that by investing, recently I've been able to invest sort of equally in sort of doing science, but also in these sort of tools and things that we're using that can kind of create this balance in the work that I'm doing. When it came time for me to apply for different PhD projects, I was kind of torn. There was a really good group looking at quantum information processing that was kind of growing in Belfast at the time that I was applying. But Hugo van der Hart, who's still my colleague and was my PhD supervisor, he sort of approached me and asked me to apply for his project. And it was looking at harmonic generation in this time-dependent R matrix theory that he had developed. And so we started out just seeing if it was possible to compute these sort of attosecond observables in the time-dependent R matrix code, which is a precursor to RMT, which we work on now. And we couldn't really claim that it was strong field physics at that point because the code was so limited. We could only really look at fairly weak fields or shorter wavelength. But as the capability built up, and we were really sort of able to look at strong field processes, and harmonic generation was my way into that. That's all I kind of did for the first 6 or 7 years of my career. I kind of the way I think about attosecond science is on this spectrum between the sort of strong field things like harmonic generation, strong field ionization, and the sort of few photon processes that we tend to deal with. I'm starting to see that these boundaries blur a little bit, and obviously there are very different techniques involved in working in one of these two areas, and experimental groups tend to focus on one or other, and theoretical groups tend to focus on one or other. And maybe it's just a sort of selfish hope that what will happen is that we'll start to sort of encroach on this middle ground between the strong field and perturbative regimes. So I think in this interesting, messy middle ground, where you're maybe trying to understand the various states that are populated during strong field ionization, or you're maybe looking at multi-photon interactions, which give rise to really interesting interference effects in processes like Rabbit. I'm hoping that in this kind of messy, interesting, intermediate place, there would be some really interesting physics there.
Is there a message you would like to leave to our audience?
And what I've landed on may not seem all that profound, but it struck me as quite profound. I was invited last week to attend the leaving party for a member of the clerical team in our school. And when I arrived, I looked around and I realized I was the only academic there. And I said to her, I'm sort of embarrassed that, you've invited me along and none of my colleagues have shown up. And she said, no, you're the only one I invited. And I said, I feel this great sense of honor that you've invited me to this thing. And she said, you're the only person who bothered to learn my name. And I was really upset, but it struck me that quite often in academia, and increasingly in academia, we are so pressured to focus on our work and to deliver in terms of papers and going to conferences and getting grants and whatever else. Everything we do is facilitated by the teams of people around us, whether they are academic members of our teams, like our PhD students or postdocs, or if they're the clerical staff who sort of facilitate all of the paperwork and other things which make us, which sort of annoy us, but ultimately keep us in jobs. Science is a team sport, and it's not just composed of these hero developers who write these codes or do these experiments or whatever it is. So my message to the attosecond science community is say hello to the receptionist.
Absolutely.